Welcome! You're listening to Making Relationships Work. We're a company focused on women and their marriage. We lead and teach women just like you how to grow into and access, whenever you need to, your wise woman self. The part of you who is deeply connected to your purpose, your innate wisdom, and your husband and family. We teach women in marriages how to rebuild trust and connection, to work through conflicts no matter how deep, no matter how painful, and to lead your marriage to a place where the two of you experience marriage mastery. This podcast is about learning the systems and techniques that truly work to reconnect you back into your marriage so that you can experience the freedom that comes with a masterful marriage. Since this podcast is totally free, if you're getting tons of value and you want to support us and make sure that you get more of this good stuff, subscribe below and rate and review our podcast today. Now, on to the show. Hello, Women Making Marriages Work. Hello, Making Relationships Work podcast and YouTube channels. It is so nice to be coming to you live on this wonderful night as we are going to talk about something really curious, something we haven't talked about before. We're going to talk about a type of language, I think is a good way to put it, or a part of our personality. That's the right way to put it, where women often go when they're leading in their marriage in a way that is destabilizing it, where you're breaking connection. And I think it's a part of yourself that you'll recognize. And if perhaps not so much in yourself, you'll recognize it in people around you. It's what we call personality mode. And it is one that women use very often. And it is the idea of controlling or scolding. And you can imagine that if you're using the controller/scolder, that you're having a relationship that's not equal, that's not connected, that's not kind, that's full of criticism and contempt. It's breaking connection. And yet women use this all the time. And so I want to talk to you tonight about what it is, what it does, and what the antidote is. Because, like I said, I think most of us know what it's like to use that part of us in a moment of frustration or in a moment of feeling like we've got to hold all this together and why can't you just do it the same way as me? And instead of using ourselves in a connection-based way, we start a conversation which is very one-sided. So maybe not a conversation, but we start a communication which is scolding, which is criticizing, which is controlling. And the controlling, scolding thing is unuseful in many ways. It's unuseful because it doesn't allow two people equally to work through a problem. It makes one person at a higher level than the other. So there's a power imbalance. And it usually has like the naughty child kind of component to it. And there's nothing more disconnecting in a marriage than having a parent who is your partner. Yeah, there's nothing less sexy. There's nothing that is happy about being married to a parent, especially one that sees you through eyes where you're not good enough. And as women who use this kind of modality to manage life, you've got to take a minute and have a think about why you use it. What does it give you that makes you choose this mode, this personality mode, over and over again? And usually it's because you're pretty full. You're pretty full of all the stuff you've got to get done. And life has become like a checklist. It's become a cognitive burden to exist in the world where you've got to keep the house at a certain level, you've got to keep the kids at a certain level, you've got to keep your life or your work at a certain level, and your husband's just in the way. He's just not good enough, is he? And when we get to that space, it is really, really distracting for husbands to be called out in ways which are blatantly harmful to them, but also in a way, who would want to be married to somebody who sees them in that way? And this is where the break in communication, the break in connection starts to really have a widening apart, where you begin the pathway apart. When you use this mode too many times, definitely, but perhaps at all. And so, what we really want to talk about tonight is what's going to happen if you keep yourself in the space of controller and scolder. And what we know is that when women use this, they are not vulnerable, they're not connected. They're not saying, I'm full and I'm overloaded and I need some help. Instead, they're using a dominant strategy that directs people in a way that they need them to behave in order to reduce stress. And I'm going to tell you now, the thing that you already know, we're going to call it right out, is that it doesn't work. It doesn't work, it won't work, it's not gonna give you the life and marriage that you want. You're going to become more and more resentful of having to run your house this way, having to run your marriage this way, and he is going to say, "Why do I have to be spoken to like this? Why do I have to experience this wrath and this disconnect and this disdain of me for existing?" And he is not going to step up and lead, and you are not going to soften and connect. And so the two of you start this space where you're starting to move apart. What tends to happen is our husbands respond in ways that are really, really uh, understandable. They go further and further and further away. So they stop helping even more because they don't want to get it wrong. They wait to be directed so they get it right. You take on more and more load and get more and more resentful, and then they start to shut down or they get angry. And so we have this cycle of frustration between both, resentment between both, disconnect between both. And ultimately, what happens is we resolve it for the moment, but it doesn't get cleaned up. That set of behaviors happens again the next day, happens again the next week, happens again the day after that. And each time it does, it leaves a trace. And over time, those traces start to become a pile. And when you get a pile of disconnect, resentment, story about how bad they are or how frustrating it is for you to have to do this, then you start to get this story that has you move apart from each other and it becomes harder to come back to each other. Do you see? And so, what we want to talk about is instead of you scolding, what you're really trying to do is to ask for some help in a way that is meaningful to you because you're scolding because you're trying to control the experience or the outcome so that it fits probably a pretty narrow definition of what success is to you, not what success is to the two of you or what success necessarily is to him. And so what we need to talk about, which is the most important part, is softening you so that you can approach it in a different way. Now, most people say, well, if I do soften, he's not going to do it even more. And that, my love, is kind of makes sense for how you've both got this set up. So we can't just stop something without traversing a conversation about why we need to stop it and what we want to create instead. And that, of course, is a much bigger conversation. So in my masterclass, I teach you a little bit more about how to do that. There's a skills component that is going to really help you. So I want you to watch that masterclass. I also want you to have a think about how you traverse a conversation where you're starting with what's not working, and you're able to move yourselves to creating something new. Most couples can't do this, and I can't teach this to you in the 15 minutes that I've got. Instead, I'm going to talk to you about having that conversation in a way as best you can. And so if you want to get really clear on how to do that differently, you can book a free call with me and my team. We will help you with that. So the link is below for that. In the meantime, your job is to identify what and when you do this, What precedes it? What's hurting you? Why do you revert to this controlling behavior? What does it feel like for you when you're doing it? And here's what I'm going to translate it for you. Broadly, you feel overwhelmed and resentful. You feel like you carry the load, and truthfully, you probably do. You feel like there's not enough time in the day, not enough space in the world, and if you don't do it, nobody else will. And so you get this list of things that need to happen. And when you've got that list, you feel better, like everything's in the right place when it's all done. And that, my loves, is the controlling part. And it is an illusion. We know rationally when we're having this conversation that control is an illusion. But most humans like the sense of routine, predictability, knowing what's going to happen next, what X plus Y equals. We're not so good in the great wilderness, which is what Brené Brown talks about, where you're braving it and figuring it out and you're allowing it to move in front of you. Most of us like the stable routine of predictability. And so when you do like the stable routine of predictability, you like to tick your checklists off, even if they're mental, every day because it feels better. And you'll have some flexibility on some of those lists because you'll know it can easily carry to the next day. However, the things that you code as being important and how they happen and what success is for each of those items is where you're getting stuck. And so most women have trouble around feeding kids. Most women like to know that their husband will feed children in a way that is nutritionally sound, happens at a certain time, happens in a certain way, and then straight after that, something else happens, and it's very predictable and stable and routine based. And most husbands have a very different experience of what that is. They have a different set of what is right and what is wrong. They have a different um, goal, and they have potentially a different methodology of getting to the same outcome, which is the kids are fed. And the problem lies in the two differences of how it gets done, the timeframes on which it gets done by, the type of food and the way it is eaten and how that happens. And what will often happen is mum will come back in and say, you did it wrong. I don't like this. Where are the vegetables? Why aren't they eating at the table? And why isn't this done and homework started? And there it comes in the controller and the scolder. And do you know what that does? That creates a husband who has done it his way, has probably been quite successful, maybe not to your standard, but still quite successful, who has loved his children and kind of gotten it done and not done it exactly to your specifications. And what does he get for that? He gets scolded. He gets told he's done it wrong. And really, what's behind it is your desire to love your family in a way where you can predictably feel safe, where you can say, they had dinner tonight, they had their vegetables, it was done by 6 o'clock, and then they did their bath, and then they did their homework, and then we get family time. And I like it like that. And so I say to you, why on earth can't you just talk to your beautiful husband in a way that is vulnerable, where you say, I'm worried if we don't do it this way, that we're going to be not feeding our kids vegetables, or they won't get as many as the recommendations are, or they won't get time for family time because they're doing their homework, or whatever it is that's actually on your mind, instead of telling them off at this high level for doing it wrong. And can you see that there's a difference in vulnerability? One comes in and assumes the power and the dominance and the control. You've done it wrong. And the other one says, I'm feeling vulnerable about the way this has happened. Can we talk it through? And if you are one of those women who is doing that regularly, it's likely because you're overwhelmed. It's likely because you don't have a way to have these conversations where you can be vulnerable. And it's likely that you don't have a different way of doing things as a team or as an individual that allows you to experience a different life. And instead, you're just kind of full all the time. You're trying to get everything done so you've survived today, you've delivered another day of their childhood, it's gone pretty well, and now you can get you a few hours sleep before you get up and do it all again, and where you've got the same rigidity and control. And that part of your personality is really getting in your way of lusciously and creatively and connectedly and kindly enjoying your day and the time you have with your kids and your beautiful husband. Because what happens to a couple who is able to work this out, able to talk through their vulnerabilities or their fears or their concerns about something, what happens is they become closer together, not further apart. What happens is it becomes us against the world. What happens is you have complete and utter faith that your husband's going to get it done. And if it's a bit different to you, then you're pretty comfortable with that because you've worked it through. That's what marriage mastery is. And it feels wonderful to be a part of a marriage that's in mastery. It feels amazing. And instead, what we have is this space where your marriage has become something that you have to dominate in order to feel in control. And where there is someone dominating, there is somebody who is not empowered because you've taken that power. And so you don't see the type of equal behaviors of two leaders in a marriage in that kind of constraint. It's not possible. And if you leave that in play in your marriage for too long, you're going to start to see the signs of a failing marriage. You're going to start to see the emotional disconnect. You're going to start to see the Snapchat with other people, the work wife, all of that kind of stuff starts to come into play when the connection at home is out of balance or non existent. And part of that comes from this dominating way that women show up when they're feeling out of control and they feel like they're overloaded. Now, does this make you a bad person? Oh, no. It makes you pretty human. Most women I've met have a version of this and use it. Is it something that's helpful for you? No, honey, it's not. Of course it's not. You know that. I know that. Is there an alternative for you? Well, clearly, at a certain pressure point, if you're still using this controlling part of you, this scolding part of you, then you don't have a reliable alternate way of handling stress. And so I'm going to tell you really clearly that you and I need to talk if you can't find a different way, because you're going to end up in a marriage and family that isn't blissfully happy, that isn't that connected, that doesn't have a sense of identity, which is us against the world, where your husband doesn't feel empowered. Who who wants to belong to a family where the empowerment is low and mum's always angry? Where dad can't get it right and the kids kind of play off that. Kids want to belong to a family unit that is connected and united because that's their safe place in the world. And if you're coming in controlling and dominating, what are you teaching them? That they have to take charge and white knuckle their way through life? This is not what you want them to know. You want them to know how to be vulnerable, how to use different strategies, how to regulate emotion. And these are all things that you need to learn in order to model it to them. And so I'm going to invite you to book a call. I want to invite you to watch my masterclass, and I want to invite you to practice out of this space as a couple. I want you to retire this part of you, and I want you to bring in a version of you that doesn't need to do this. And now you're going to need help with that. So book the call with me, and we'll get you really clear on how to do that. My loves, you don't want this angry, controlling, dominating part of you through the holidays. You do not want this part of you to dominate until your marriage is in tatters and you're literally calling me in crisis because your husband has made a move to separate or has moved out of the bedroom or is living in the basement or is looking up divorce lawyers on the internet or is chatting with somebody else or is self-medicating. These are all the times and pieces, these experiences I hear about every day, all day, because these behaviors from our beautiful women have gone on for too long, and there's no room left for the man to be powerful and kind and connected and get it right. So he starts to learn that he gets it wrong. And when he figures out that he gets it wrong all the time and he's a constant disappointment to you, it triggers shame, it triggers guilt, and it triggers separation emotionally from you. And then he starts to build an identity away from you. And all of a sudden, you do not have that connected marriage that you once relied on without thinking about. And that's when you will call me. But how about this? How about you don't wait till it gets there and you call me now and we sort this out? How about that? All right, my loves, rant finished. I love you. Let's get rid of this part of you. Let us decommission it. Let us bring in another part of you that can lead with a connection focus, with a kindness focus, with a love focus, rather than a control focus and a scolding focus. If you need help, book a call. Watch my masterclass. I'll talk to you later. Bye, loves. Thank you for tuning into today's show. If you're feeling fired up and you're ready to grow and you want to know more about how to do that, here is what I want you to do now. I want you to watch my marriage masterclass. This masterclass will show you how my clients have turned their struggling marriages into thriving marriages, even without their husband's buy-in. How my clients have gone from cycles of poor communication, disconnect and loneliness to being teammates and soulmates with their husbands again, even after they've already tried everything. And the proven system my clients use to start transforming their marriages in minutes, not years, because life is too precious to waste one more minute in an unhappy and unfulfilling marriage. So if this is what you're looking for, I want you to